It all began on a cold, foggy night, the kind that makes the world feel unnaturally still. I had been driving through an unfamiliar town after taking a wrong turn during a road trip. The fuel gauge was dangerously low, and my phone had no signal. Panic was starting to creep in when I spotted a faint glow in the distance, a weathered sign that read, Rosewood Hotel. It was old, the kind of place you'd expect to find in a history book, with chipped paint and windows that seemed to peer out like hollow eyes. I didn't have much of a choice. It was either stop here or risk running out of gas in the middle of nowhere. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, the car's headlights illuminated the building's eerie facade. The hotel stood alone, surrounded by dense woods, its towering frame casting long, menacing shadows. There was something unsettling about the place, but exhaustion and desperation overruled my instincts. I grabbed my bag and headed inside. The lobby was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of mildew and something faintly sweet, like decaying flowers. A dusty reception desk stood in the corner, and behind it was a man, old and gaunt, with eyes that seemed too dark for his pale face. "Looking for a room?" he asked in a voice that was almost a whisper. I nodded, my voice caught in my throat. He handed me an old-fashioned key and muttered, "Room 13, top floor." A chill ran down my spine at the mention of the number, but I shrugged it off. Superstition wasn't something I believed in, at least, not until that night. The elevator was out of order, so I climbed the creaking staircase, the sound echoing through the empty halls. Each step felt heavier, as if something unseen was trying to hold me back. By the time I reached the top floor, the air felt colder, and I could hear the faintest sound of something or someone. It was like a soft humming, almost melodic, drifting from somewhere far away. I shook it off, convincing myself it was just the wind playing tricks. Room 13 was at the end of the hallway, its door slightly ajar. I hesitated before pushing it open, my fingers trembling against the cold metal of the key. The room was as expected, old, musty, and sparsely furnished. A single bed with worn sheets, a wooden dresser with a cracked mirror, and a window that overlooked the dark, endless woods. But there was something else. A small, tattered journal, sitting on the bedside table as if it had been waiting for me. Curiosity got the better of me. I flipped open the journal, and my heart skipped a beat. The pages were filled with scrawled writing, frantic and chaotic. "It's not just a rumor," one entry read. "She's still here, watching, waiting." My breath caught as I turned the pages, each one more unsettling than the last. The final entry was dated nearly 50 years ago, and it simply read, "Room 13 will be my end. If you're reading this, leave now. Don't look for her." A shiver ran down my spine. I slammed the journal shut and looked around the room, suddenly hyper-aware of every shadow, every sound. Something felt wrong. The humming I had heard earlier was louder now, closer, and then I saw it. The faint outline of a figure in the mirror standing behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. My heart pounded in my chest as the lights flickered and dimmed, plunging me into near darkness. And that's when I heard it, a soft, chilling voice whispering my name. I froze, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. The whisper came again, louder this time, dragging my name out in a way that sent chills racing down my spine. The room felt alive, the walls almost pulsing with an unseen energy. My eyes darted around, searching for the source of the voice, but there was nothing. Only the darkness pressing in closer with each flicker of the light. Then, the door creaked. It wasn't just the wind, it was deliberate, slow, as if someone or something was pushing it open from the other side. My throat went dry, and I instinctively backed away, clutching the edge of the bed for balance. The hallway beyond was pitch black, yet I could hear soft footsteps, barely audible but unmistakable, drawing nearer. I wanted to scream, to call out for help, but the air in my lungs felt heavy, almost as if the room itself was suffocating me. Suddenly, the lights in the hallway flickered to life for just a moment, and I saw her. A woman, dressed in a faded white gown, her face pale and lifeless, with eyes that seemed to stare straight through me. She stood motionless, her head tilted slightly, as if studying me. Her hair hung in damp, tangled strands around her face, and her lips were parted, as though she were about to speak. But before I could react, the lights went out again, and she was gone. My instincts finally took over, and I bolted for the door. I stumbled into the hallway, my footsteps echoing as I ran blindly toward the staircase. The humming was louder now, filling the air around me, accompanied by a faint sobbing that seemed to follow me no matter how fast I moved. My heart pounded as I reached the stairs, gripping the railing tightly to keep from falling. But the moment I started descending, the humming stopped. I paused, trying to catch my breath, when I felt it, a cold hand brushing against my shoulder. I whipped around, expecting to see her again, but there was no one there. Only the dim hallway stretching endlessly behind me. I turned back to the stairs, desperate to get out, but the ground floor seemed impossibly far away, as if the staircase had grown longer, twisting and winding like a labyrinth. The walls felt narrower, closing in, and the air was thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. Then, I heard the voice again, clear and piercing, echoing through the stairwell. "You shouldn't have stayed." It was the same voice that had whispered my name, but now it was filled with anger, almost a warning. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. Panic gripped me as I stumbled down the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. I didn't care where I ended up. I just needed to get out of that hotel. But the faster I moved, the more the shadows seemed to reach for me, stretching and twisting like living things. Finally, I saw the lobby below, dimly lit but still there, a promise of escape. I threw myself down the last flight of stairs, nearly falling as I reached the bottom. The old man from the reception desk was standing there, his expression unreadable. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice calm, almost amused. His words stopped me in my tracks, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. He hadn't been surprised to see me. It was as if he had been expecting this all along. I stood there, frozen, staring at the old man. His calm demeanor unnerved me even more than the terror I had just escaped. His dark eyes seemed to gleam in the faint light, and his thin lips curled into a faint smile. "I told you not to stay in room 13, he said softly, though I knew he hadn't warned me at all. I tried to speak, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come out. It was as if the weight of the entire hotel was pressing down on me, silencing me. Gathering my courage, I finally forced out, "What's going on here? Who is she?" My voice was shaky, barely above a whisper, but the old man didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering how much to tell me. "She was the owner's daughter," he said after a long pause. "Beautiful, young, and full of life. But this place took her." His words sent a chill through me. "What do you mean, took her?" I asked, my fear mixing with a desperate need to understand. He sighed, his expression darkening. "Years ago, a tragedy struck. She fell in love with a man who stayed here, a drifter. When her father found out, he forbade her from seeing him. In his rage, he locked her in room 13, thinking he could keep her safe, keep her pure. But he underestimated the darkness of this place. She was found weeks later, lifeless, alone. They say her screams echoed through the hotel for days after she was gone. The story hit me like a punch to the gut. My hands trembled as I gripped the counter for support. So, she's still here? I managed to ask, though I already knew the answer. The old man nodded slowly, his eyes unreadable. Her spirit never left. She watches. She waits. Sometimes she warns, but mostly, she punishes those who disturb her. His words barely registered as I backed away, glancing toward the front doors. Freedom was so close, yet something held me in place. I turned back to the man. "Why didn't you stop me from going to that room?" I demanded, my voice rising. He shrugged, an unsettling calmness in his demeanor. "Would you have believed me if I had? People come here thinking the stories are just rumors, and most don't leave to tell them." That was enough for me. I bolted for the door, but as soon as my hand touched the handle, the lights in the lobby flickered and went out completely. The darkness was absolute, suffocating, and the air grew icy cold. Then came the sound. The humming, soft at first, but growing louder, more menacing. It surrounded me, echoing off the walls, filling every corner of the room. And then I heard her voice again. But this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a scream, sharp and piercing, filled with anger and pain. I stumbled backward, desperate to get away, but the front door wouldn't budge. It was as if the hotel itself was holding me hostage. The scream faded into silence, and for a moment, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing. Then I felt it, the same icy hand on my shoulder as before. I turned, expecting to see her, but there was nothing, just the suffocating darkness. And then, the old man spoke again, his voice calm, almost mocking. "You can't leave until she's finished with you." His words echoed in the suffocating silence, each syllable wrapping around me like a noose. I turned to face him, my chest tightening with panic. "What do you mean, I can't leave?" I demanded, my voice trembling. He didn't answer, only stepping back into the shadows, his figure blending into the dark like he was a part of it. My heart raced as the humming returned, louder now, almost deafening. It felt as if the sound was coming from inside my head, pulsing with each frantic beat of my heart. I stumbled toward the staircase, desperate to find another way out. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone, hoping for a flashlight or some way to call for help. But the screen was dead. No signal, no light, nothing. The humming gave way to a soft, chilling laughter, a sound so cold and unnatural it felt like needles piercing my skin. I gripped the railing tightly and began climbing the stairs, my legs feeling like lead. I didn't know where I was going. Every instinct told me to run, but there was no escape. The hotel seemed endless now, its walls stretching and shifting like a living maze. As I reached the second floor, I stopped abruptly. She was there, standing at the end of the hallway, her pale form illuminated by a faint, ghostly light. Her head tilted slightly, her lifeless eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my knees buckle. "You shouldn't have stayed," she whispered, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. The lights above flickered violently, casting her shadow across the walls, impossibly large and distorted, as if the hotel itself was amplifying her presence. I tried to speak, to plead for my life, but the words died in my throat. She started moving toward me, not walking but gliding, her bare feet never touching the ground. With every step she took, the air grew colder, heavier, making it harder to breathe. The The hallway around me twisted, the walls bending inward as if trying to swallow me whole. I turned and ran, my feet barely keeping up with my desperation. The laughter followed me, growing louder and more menacing with each step. When I reached the 3rd floor, I stumbled into a room at random, slamming the door shut behind me. My chest heaved as I leaned against it, the cold seeping through the wood like an icy grip. The room was identical to the one I had been assigned, room 13, but the journal on the nightstand was gone. Instead, there was a single piece of paper with the words scrawled in red. "You can't run. She will find you." My hands trembled as I dropped the paper, my eyes darting around the room for anything I could use to defend myself. But there was nothing. Just the same worn furniture and cracked mirror. And then I saw it. In the reflection of the mirror, her figure appeared behind me, her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. I spun around, but the room was empty. The laughter came again, louder this time, shaking the walls as the lights flickered violently. The door burst open, but it wasn't her. It was the old man. His face was blank, his eyes cold as he stepped inside. "She's chosen you," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You can't leave until she's done." I backed away, shaking my head, refusing to believe what he was saying. "What does she want?" I screamed, desperation choking my voice. He looked at me, his expression unchanging. "To keep you here, just like the others." The walls began to close in, the humming and laughter merging into a deafening roar. My vision blurred as the air grew colder, the darkness pressing in from all sides. And then, I saw her again, standing in the doorway, her pale face twisted into a grotesque smile, her outstretched hand reaching for me. The old man stepped aside, his figure dissolving into the shadows as she moved closer. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. The last thing I saw was her face, inches from mine, her hollow eyes consuming me as the world around me faded into nothingness. And then, there was silence. They found my car days later, still parked outside the Rosewood Hotel. The doors were locked, the keys in the ignition, but I was gone. The hotel stood as it always had, untouched and unchanged, its secrets hidden behind its crumbling facade. And somewhere inside, I knew. She was still there, waiting for the next unlucky soul who dared to step inside.